Aho, ee-ah-ho.
And surprise, when they got to Guatemala, they met up. They came in the Sabal, at the port side, and they got off in Puerto Barrios, all of them. That's where the boat let them out, in Puerto Barrios, Isabel. And there, some of them went on to other areas of Isabel, but all of us are concentrated in Isabel. But those who remained in Puerto Barrios, they were automatically placed in an area called, well, it's the beach, in the beach area where the Garifunas were. So you could imagine that the sophisticated British, European ruled Jamaicans, they come with this whole European air about them, and they meet up with the Garifunas in the beach. The Garifunas did not speak English or Spanish. They spoke Garifuna. The Jamaicans only spoke English. So these two groups immediately, they looked at each other and each one called the other Blacks. To the Garifuna, Gio is the pronunciation of the word, and Gio means the other Blacks. And if you see my expression, they had a way of doing something like, when they point with their lips, and it's like, Gio. And the Jamaicans would do the same thing. And they are the other Blacks. They're not one of we, they're not one of us. So this created a little conflict in the area where they lived. But to the Americans, United Fruit Company people, and to the Guatemalans, what's the problem? They're all Black. But as the problem increased, because there were definite problems, these two groups had nothing in common except their Blackness. So as they realized that there was a problem, what they did, the Guatemalans did, is they moved the Jamaicans. They moved them to a totally undeveloped area of Puerto Barrios. I mean, we are talking swamps. We are talking totally uninhabitable area. But that's where they put them, and it's across the river. There's a river in between that separates the two parts. So they put them on the other side of the river. However, they had to cross over to the other side to go to work because that's where the wharf was. And that's where the United Fruit Company commissary was, but they lived all the way on the other side, which they actually built up and they developed over time. They developed what was known as English Colonia. And everybody there, we knew each other. That's where I grew up most of my childhood, part of my childhood. Everybody knew each other. It was Miss Campbell, Miss Jane, all of them, and neighbors. And the way they built their houses, they were wooden houses that were usually high, elevated. And the reason why they elevated the houses there is because the land was a swamp. It was a swamp, and in order not to be flooded, they had to build the houses high. Every house had a veranda, what we called a veranda or a porch. And in the evenings, we'd sit outside and eat fruit. They also took their fruits. They took their vegetables. We had yam. We had yampi. We had ackee. Almost every family had an ackee tree and a breadfruit tree. And I remember these things from the childhood, So these are the Garifuna people that the Jamaicans met when they got there. And the Garifuna also have a fascinating, fascinating history that is really worth looking into because of the mixture of the way they came. Anyway, these are the Garifuna people that the Jamaicans met when they got there. And the two groups continued to live in Puerto Barrios, the Garifuna on one side of the river and the Afro-Jamaicans were living on the other side. And they really never met. They never came together. And for years, it wasn't actually a conflict. It was just that they couldn't relate to each other. And as a result, they avoided each other.
Okay.
And it wasn't until public school became mandatory in the first, in the second generation, my generation, public school became mandatory for everyone. Assimilation. And I like to say that my people, they came, they saw, they conquered, and they excelled in all aspects. The settlement was challenging, but they were up to the challenge, and they managed to create like little Jamaicas wherever they settled. So there are 5 English colonies, colonias, if you will, in Isabel. And wherever the groups of Jamaicans were, they created a little Jamaica. And they were self-sufficient because there were laws that prohibited them from actually mixing with the people. They left the work, they were able to work, but they did not trust, I guess they didn't trust having these Black people and the little Spanish people, you know? So they had curfew. They had to be back in Colonia by 9 p.m. So they could go out to work in the morning. And I still have this, I still could imagine seeing them. You know, I could see my grandfather going to work with his sharply pressed khaki pants, as they say, khaki pants and white short sleeve shirt and his hat. And this is the way they all look. This is was like a uniform, and they all went to work in that matter. So anyway, they got settled each in their respective colonias. So there's Colonia in Bananera, Morales, Tequisate, and Quirigua, and Puerto Barrios. Those are the 3 areas where they settled.
Yeah, hold on. And sorry to interrupt you. So these areas, they are provinces, or they are just areas within a province?
Areas within a province. We could say that the province is Isabel. Okay. And Isabel is divided into different provinces, okay, and its areas, designated areas within.
Mm-hmm. And Isabel is on the port?
Puerto Barrios, Isabel, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's big enough that it's large enough that it goes further inland.
Okay.
Puerto Barrios is right there at the port.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Then they travel from Puerto Barrios by train to get to the other areas. But what is distinctive about the group in Puerto Barrios is that only Puerto Barrios had the Garifunas. Okay. So the experience of those living in Puerto Barrios as they got settled was a little different, because there were 2, you know, they were the other Blacks settling in this area. Now, later on, when I was doing the research for my book and I spoke to Garifunas, they said that they were told about these Black people who acted like white people. So they didn't know where they came from either. So the Garifunas were as much at a loss as the Jamaicans were. So they just looked at them, but they saw that there was something different about them. They were definitely not like us. That's what they said.
Right.
And growing up, I remember that we were told, you know, don't have anything to do with those people. We just don't have anything to do with them. I mean, we couldn't speak the same language. What could we do? So as I said, once we went to school, the public school, that's where assimilation started to actually happen among the 2 groups of Blacks, and as well as the Garifunas coming out of themselves and joining society. So as I said, they came, they saw, they conquered. They conquered the wilderness. They created nice, beautiful homes with gardens and all the fruit trees. And by the time I came around, all the fruit trees and everybody had their little sorrel bush. Everybody had their breadfruit tree, ackee tree, and definite coconut tree, because Guatemala is not a country that produces milk coconut. They are good on water coconut, but not milk coconut. So the Jamaicans needing the coconut milk for rice and beans. I mean, rice and beans and coconut milk, you know? So what they did is they actually brought coconut trees. So families had coconut trees all over. Now it's so difficult to get coconut for milk.
Somos voces de la historia, sangre, tinta y papel. somos voces de la historia. Mis ancestros, su saber. Mis ancestros, su saber. Mis ancestros, su saber.